All right. All right. So this is going to be my replaceable versus disposable video. Now, a lot of people in the manosphere say that men are disposable. Like Stefan Molyneux's men propose, women dispose comment, and just the basic evolutionary psychology theory that men are quote unquote disposable, which is in and of itself a ridiculous claim. Because if you get rid of all the men in society, then you will no longer have a society. Sure, men are replaceable, and some men have more social value than other men, but to say that men on a whole, as half of the species of humans, that men are just disposable, is a ridiculous claim. Let me give you a good example of what I mean by replaceable and not disposable. And this also goes into the capitalist theory of value, where, say for instance, you have a car. A car, the engine is the most valuable part of the car. It's the most irreplaceable part of the car. It's the most important part of the car. It could arguably be one of the most complex parts of the car. And on the other hand, you have the bolts, which are maybe the cheapest part of the car, and they're very easy to replace, very simple to replace. You can go down to any auto shop and just buy some bolts, replace the bolts in your car. But let me ask you this. If I were to say that I'm going to take 5 random bolts out of your car, would you feel safe driving your car? Would your car even work? Say, for instance, if I just took the one bolt out of the linkage in between the engine and the transmission, or the linkage between the clutch and the transmission, or if I took the 5 bolts out of one of the wheels, then you couldn't drive the car. So as replaceable as the bolts are, as being the most easily replaced part of the car, they are still an indispensable part of the car. You can use other examples, like for instance, like in a military setting. Sometimes on the most dangerous missions, you need to send the most highly trained soldiers. So on one hand, the most highly trained soldiers are the most valuable soldiers, but they're also the soldiers that you send into the most dangerous missions where they're most likely to be killed. Right? So these two concepts are not interchangeable. Replaceable and disposable are not synonymous with each other. Like, for instance, if you have replaceable blades in your razor, it doesn't mean that you can get rid of the blades in your razor. It means that when the first set of blades go dull, then you replace them with another set of blades. And the fact that MGTOW or other red pill guys will make the claim that men are disposable proves that these men still harbor a lot of feminist ideals in their mind, in their daily life, in their worldview. Because if you truly believe that men are disposable, not replaceable, and you look around in society and then you're complaining about immigrants or any of the other problems that come along with the decline of society, with the decline of men, and you still spout the same feminist ideology that men have no value, basically, and that they're disposable, you have fallen for the okie doke. You've gone completely into a state of delusion where you believe made up evolutionary psychology tales that honestly make no sense. Just because you look into the past and you see that more men have died than women, the logical conclusion is not that therefore men are disposable, right? It just means that men have a different biological role where they're put into danger more often. But just because you're put into danger more often does not mean that your purpose is to be killed. Like with the example of the soldier. Of course, the military doesn't want the highly trained soldier to be killed on the mission. The purpose of the mission is not to kill the highly trained soldier. The mission is very dangerous, and the likelihood that the highly trained soldier could be killed is more than some guy that's just hanging out at the base. But that doesn't mean that the purpose of the soldier is to be killed. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, where it's almost as if the evolutionary biologists are saying that the purpose of man is to be disposed of. And that in and of itself is a ridiculous claim. And it doesn't make any sense, and that's why sometimes evolutionary biology falls short when they're trying to explain phenomena. And that's why I just don't 100% buy into it immediately just because somebody says, oh, evolutionary biology says, right? It's just like this whole bottleneck theory. Like you're looking at one tiny point in history and then saying, well, because when people switch from hunter-gatherer to farmers, the farmers outcompeted the hunter-gatherers, therefore men should die. It's not non sequitur. It doesn't just follow that because, World War II happened, that means that we should consistently kill like 50% of the male population between 18 and 30, just because World War II happened in the past. When you actually look at societies, most of the time, most societies, they didn't kill all the men, right? It's the same thing with hypergamy. Hypergamy is only 20% of men. Then how come in Rome, in Egypt, in the United States, slaves had children? If hypergamy were like the end-all be-all of human existence, then how can in every society basically that's ever existed in history could slaves have children? If women only reproduce with the top 20% of men throughout the entirety of history, right? Obviously a slave in any society, whether it was Rome, Egypt, the United States, China, right? They were not considered as being in the top 20% of society, a slave, right? But yet, you can look in the Bible. Slaves had children, right? Jewish slaves had children. Egyptian slaves had children. Black slaves had children. Roman slaves had children, right? So the theory doesn't hold up. It just doesn't. Because it's obvious that a slave is not in the top 20% of society, right? And then the people that, especially in the red pill, who consider themselves to be right-wing, I don't know if I agree with that, especially if they have these type of views where they believe that you can get rid of men and still have a society when society's made up of men, women, and children. Sure, men are replaceable. So are women. If a woman dies in childbirth or you don't like the woman that you're dating, you replace her with another woman, right? And this goes into the whole Briefold's law thing where men pre-select the women that they're going to be with, right? No man has ever been rejected by a woman that he didn't approach first, right? And that's what the femcells are talking about. But you completely ignore that when the femcells say, well, we're not being approached by the men that we actually want to be with. You ignore that and you say, well, Briefold's law says that women choose who they're going to be with and men have no part in the selection process of sexual selection, which is ridiculous because the women that you've never approached have no chance to reject you. It's only the women that you approach, and so therefore you're biased into believing that women get to reject men, when in actuality, all the women that you never approached were rejected by you before you even ever didn't approach them, right? Because like I said, you can't be rejected by a woman that you don't already have interest in, right? So you're pre-selecting the woman, right? And it just doesn't make any logical sense, right? To say that if you say that men have no choice in the sexual selection process and you've ever been with a woman, that would therefore logically follow that you were raped. And I'm assuming that you weren't raped by a woman if you've ever been with a woman, right? So we can see that these evolutionary psychology tropes is what they are, because they can't explain all of the inconsistencies and logical inconsistencies that they present, right? It's the same with this disposable male thing. It sounds good on paper. It makes you feel good or something. I don't know why it makes you feel good thinking that men are disposable, but you can see what happens, right? Because the elites, they're not falling for this, right? They don't think that you can just get rid of men. That's why, just like in the car analogy, they go and they get new bolts. And in any other situation, you would think the same. If I took the bolts out of your car, you would say, oh, well, I'm just going to go to the store and get new bolts and replace the old bolts, i.e. bringing in immigrants, right? Because I want to drive my car. I'm not going to allow someone to convince me that I can take the bolts out of my car and the bolts are disposable, because the car won't run. So in any other situation, you would realize that even though a part of a system is more easily replaced than another part of the system, it's still indispensable to the system. And that's a difference between disposable and replaceable. Because something that can be replaced, sure, you as an individual man might be replaceable, but every individual person in the system is replaceable. But as a universal, right, on the whole, in the bigger picture, you can't dispose of men. You can't just dispose of men. You can't just get rid of men out of the system. And you can see that when you try to do that, then they just replace you with other men, right? They might replace you with less experienced men, or men from a different culture, or men that are willing to work for cheaper. But no matter what, you need men in the system. You need men, women, and children to form society. And if you yourself believe that men are disposable, then you yourself will be disposed of more easily, and you're basically going along with feminist ideology. If you believe that men have no value, basically, and they're disposable. So that's my video on disposable versus replaceable. And I know this, again, I'm going against MGTOW, red pill orthodoxy, and evolutionary psychology orthodoxy, but it's logically inconsistent. So I just can't believe it because there's no evidence backing it up. Like I said, you can point to tiny periods in history and then say that one day in history is evidence that human society always operates like that, when it's not true. You can say, oh, well, World War II happened, so therefore we should drop nuclear bombs on every city every day for the rest of human existence. Because, World War II happened. Look, they dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that proves that humans drop nuclear bombs on each other all the time, right? Right, guys? Come on, right? It makes complete sense. It makes complete sense that we should be dropping bombs on ourselves every day, because one day in history we can look back and see that people drop bombs, right? So that's really it. Replaceable, disposable don't mean the same thing. Everybody's replaceable. Nobody's disposable, or as a whole, as a universal, men are not disposable, women are not disposable, children are not disposable. Maybe you as an individual person can be replaced, but that's just part of life. So that's all I got for this one. Have a good day and go MGTOW.